So this video is going to touch on climate change. I thought I would go there. Okay, back in around 2010, if I remember this correctly, the US commissioned it was either 2 or 3 groups of scientists with a project, and this project was to, with the latest technology, discovery findings and data, to determine what would be the ideal number of human beings on planet Earth to achieve sustainability in the context of natural resources and digging stuff out of the ground. Now, straight away, oil, comes to mind because we have an oil-based world. Oil is the base material for our transportation, energy and plastics. I mean, it is, they call it black gold, it really is. Anyway, these groups of scientists were independent, and they went around the world. They dug out ice cores, they looked at pollution in the atmosphere, and they looked at all the very detailed consumption figures of the oil industry and raw materials industry, etc. Anyway, the findings came back, and the reason that they commissioned more than one body, independent body, was they wanted to correlate the findings. They wanted to, because that's how you would do a project like this. You wouldn't just have one group of people, like they do with COVID. There's just a group of people that know everything. But with this study, they were independent bodies. And so the first group of scientists came back, and their bottom line was, for sustainability indefinitely on planet Earth, it would be a good idea to have no more than 2.5 billion people on planet Earth, which happens to be the population of the planet in 1950. So I'll come back to that. Anyway, so the next 2 independent bodies came back, and you wouldn't believe it. They both had figures about the same. An ideal sustainable world population would be about 2.5 billion. Now, what's interesting about that is that, as I understood it at the time, these independent studies were independent, and they all came back with the same amount of people. I'm sure there was other findings, but it's the number of people on Earth that I thought was very interesting. So they all came back with, for planet Earth to go into the future, and for Earth to have sustainability, we need no more than 2.5 billion people on Earth. The population of planet Earth in 1950. So that's only, 70 years ago. I mean, absolutely unbelievable if you think about it. So at that, there were lots of findings, and straight away I'm going to look at carbon dioxide. In the 1950s, the measurement of carbon dioxide was actually achieved by an American scientist, and I just can't remember his name. But as I understand it, the way that he measured the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere is the same method that they use today, just with more modern equipment. And so in the 1950s, when this test was first established, it recorded an amount of CO2. And I don't remember the actual amount, but it's quite a small amount. Today, that amount is 3 times. So in the space of 70 years, the amount of CO2 in our atmosphere has increased 3 times. I could be wrong there. I'm sure that someone will correct me if I'm wrong. But the point that I want to make here is that CO2 has gone up in our atmosphere. And the scientists are actually able to extrapolate the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere throughout time. And And I think that that is about the same as 1950 or a bit less. There has been, back in time, you know, larger amounts of CO2 apparently, is their calculation, indicating that CO2 does go up and down. But I think this is way back in time. So I don't want to dwell on that too much. But what I want to pull out for this video is, since 1950, CO2 has gone up. So since 1950, the world population has gone up. It's gone up nearly 3 times. So straight away you can see a correlation there. Just on those facts alone, you can take from that, okay, well, for the last 2,000 years, how many people were on planet Earth? Well, less than 2.5 billion. And I forget the figure that was quoted around the birth of Jesus, around the year 0-ish. But as I understand it, the curve is pretty flat. We get to 1950 and the population curve goes straight up. And so anyone that knows a bit about science, physics and maths, when curves do a hockey stick like that, it tends to mean that there's a reaction. Something else is going to happen. So we have many more people on Earth. We have CO2 in the atmosphere going up. And you don't really need to be a scientist to understand that our atmosphere looks like something that's pretty steady, and you know, you could take we're in symbiosis with the atmosphere, and that's very true actually. But you know, so things change. The amount of people on Earth does have an impact on the sustainability and how we live on Earth. So I then remembered looking at the oil industry, and I met someone that explained to me that they had sight of a report on oil wellhead pressures. Now, an oil wellhead, as I understand it, when you first discover an oil field, the pressure is at its highest. Sorry, it might be at its lowest, not lowest, but the oil wellhead pressure, you can measure how much oil is left in the ground from the wellhead pressure. And what this report had indicated to this person that then told me was that the oil wellhead pressures that around the world were indicating that we had used half of the oil in that oil field. So we'd reached peak oil, and it was called peak oil. And so that meant that, and this was around 2008, I think it was around that time. It might have been a few years plus or minus. So I remember thinking, gosh, this is, very concerning really, because if the oil that we've discovered so far has been half used, in the space of 60 years, we've found this world-changing natural resource, and we've half used it. And so you can extrapolate from that all kinds of doomsday scenarios, because we have built a world for ourselves that is highly dependent on oil. And if we're halfway through, it then becomes not an issue of the price of oil, but it becomes an issue of who gets to buy the oil. And it was called peak oil, and it was something that might have been, conspiracy theory again, that could have been planted to increase the cost of oil. I don't know. But I remember thinking, okay, so if there's an element of truth to this, so we've got CO2 levels going up, we've got increased population going up, and we've got the natural resource of oil going down. Now, at the same time, I looked at the usage of other raw materials and natural raw materials. And all these findings were quite concerning because they were all going down. So very briefly, you can take a view that on Earth, we dig stuff out the ground and we make stuff. We grow animals and we eat them, but basically we consume. And so as a population grows larger, we consume more. But what happens when a natural resource like oil becomes depleted? So that's when we rely on technology to provide us with an alternative. But you can see where I'm going here. We have some very, this is, big picture stuff. But we have something in the atmosphere that we know is important going up. We have more people going up, more mouths to feed. Now, I remember 10 years ago chatting with people about climate change, about the possibility of being overpopulated. Now, I have to say right here, based on my work experience, based on all the people I've spoken to, I really do believe that climate change and sustainability are real big issues for people on Earth. I think we have a problem. I really do. And I think CO2 in our atmosphere is like a canary in the mine. Scientists will be able to tell us that when CO2 reaches a certain level, it's going to mean this, it's going to mean that. It's going to mean that places around the equator, instead of getting an inch of rain a year, they're going to get 0. It means that crops that did grow, that 2 degrees increase in ambient temperature will kill that crop. And I believe that these predictions are very real and they're going to affect a lot of people. So this is a big deal. And I think I've mentioned Greta Thunberg before. I think she's great. I really do. And I think that she's bringing awareness to a generation of people that it's going to affect. I mean, but I do think that climate change is going to impact, people in my lifetime. We're going to see problems here. So climate change for me isn't just a very factual thing that indicates that we have to address our usage of natural materials. But it also means we have to look at what happens when we run out of certain natural resources. For me, it also means that we have to look at, I think, and this is a very difficult subject to talk about, population. Because if 8 billion people on Earth is okay, we need to know that we can feed everyone, and we need to know that it's sustainable. If we go back to those reports in 2010, those scientists that were commissioned to do that report, that's not what they found. Those reports indicated that there are too many mouths to feed on Earth. So this is a great big subject. It's very controversial, very uncomfortable to discuss, and you can imagine for a government it must be a nightmare to broach. How do you deal with this? But I think climate change is actually something that does need to be discussed, needs to be in the public domain, and awareness needs to be there. And we do need to, as a general public, be aware of it, and we need it in discussion. And this is where we rely on our science community to do what they do, and to actually use their trade to determine decision-making factors that we as a population, our governments can get together, have a look at the data, and then make informed decisions about, what policies should be best. Of course, today we have everything is green. We've all heard of it now, I'm sure. We know that electric cars are, they sound popular. People are buying them. All the ad campaigns definitely support them. And on the face of it, it looks a good idea. We know that cars, petrol cars, diesel cars in the street, when a big truck goes by you and it's spewing out its exhaust, that won't exist. You'll just hear a whir noise. But of course, the electric car is charged up, from power that's on the grid, and that power comes from a power station. And there are power stations, there are a lot of power stations in China actually, that are still coal-fired. So, the electric car doesn't stop CO2 being created. It just simply changes the point where it's created. And as I understand it, though, on the whole, the electric car is definitely creating less of a carbon footprint than a petrol or diesel vehicle. But anyway, that's another subject. But what it is, it's this commitment to change, and we believe that it's a change in the right direction, and it's a change for the good of everyone. There again, some people will say no, this is just another money-making opportunity for someone in the background that has a vested interest in technology, green technology. People making windmills, hydro generators, electric cars, and anything green. So, I mean, this does raise an issue of transparency once again. Do we trust governments? Do governments tell us the truth? But we'll come back to that again. But anyway, back to climate change. I believe it's real. I believe that we need to be talking about or asking the questions of scientists, how much stuff is left in the ground that humans need to dig out, and how long will it last us into the future? Because if the oil data indicates that we found this resource and in the space of 60 years we've half used it, what happens in the next 60 years? But we've built a world on oil. What on earth are we going to replace it with? I don't know if you can see the ramifications of oil, but it's absolutely tremendous. I mean, this really is World War material. Something goes wrong with oil. I mean, I'm actually thinking, not only would the cost of oil not be the issue would be who gets to buy it. And also, which country has most of it, or has the control of most of it. So straight away there, this is a massive, very delicate subject, very important subject. And straight away we're on the world stage. And, what a tricky one to actually navigate. But yes, we need to be thinking about climate change. We need to be thinking the associated issues, which are number of people on Earth, sustainability, how many people on Earth should we have, what's ethical, what's right, who should have all the technology, who should have all the benefits, who should own all the resources in the ground, is it fair? You can see this is one heck of a large subject. So I think at that point I'll end this one, but I will leave you with, I believe climate change is real. I think the issues behind it are very serious. I think we need to be talking about how many people on Earth. Is this the right number? Should there be less? How do we get to that lesser amount? If it's okay to have more, we just need to know that it's okay to have more people on Earth. And proof that there are natural resources there, and we can indefinitely use them. I doubt that though. So yeah, this is great big subject matter, and I really hope I haven't rambled on too much. As I've been chatting, I can see how complex this is to... Anyway, climate change, big problem. We need to talk about it. Science, hopefully, will provide all the solutions that we need. And I will say ciao for now.